regarding its role in auditing and monitoring the work undertaken by Amy to complete the M8 Woodside viaducts?
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Since May 2023, Turner and Townsend has provided Transport Scotland with commercial assurance and project control support on the M8 Woodside temporary propping project. They are in regular dialogue with the Transport Scotland team and attend frequent project programme boards and provide commentary regarding project progress. Turner and Townsend review and comment on tender submissions from Amy and their subcontractors, review cost forecasting and assist Transport Scotland with future budget setting. They input to project risk reviews and quantify a suitable risk allowance to be included in the project cost range.
Colleen McNeill.
The Cabinet Secretary is aware that the completion dates for the M8 Woodside Viaduct repairs are currently autumn 26 eastbound and late 27 for the westbound carriageway. That's 6 years since the project began, and the budget's gone from 33 million to 152 million. In 2021, the works were classed as emergency, meaning there are no penalty clauses for late delivery. So, as the Scottish Government, how they're going to ensure that the work is done efficiently and timely? Can they require Amy to take steps to accelerate the works, such as overtime, for example, which would be reasonable? So what measures can the expert group and Turner and Townsend, who are monitoring the performance, to put in place to ensure that Amy are held to account, given the nature of the contract with no penalty clauses, to ensure that there are no further delays to the repair of the M8 viaduct? Cabinet Secretary.
So clearly safety is a primary concern, but also value for money and cost management, which I referred to, and that has to be regularly scrutinised and accounted for. In terms of penalty clauses, may I refer to the member to the briefing that she received, and indeed other members did, about some of the challenges that have been facing the 23 different locations that have to be addressed, including uncharted obstruction near the Strathclyde passenger transport subway. Now, clearly, uncharted, unrecorded, or recorded in a different area of uncharted obstructions is not something that we would expect necessarily to have on a penalty issue. This is a very difficult and challenging project. I think everybody understands that. And her point about can anything be brought forward, we will try, particularly on those elements that are requiring more attention because of the intensity of the traffic.
Question number 4, Tess White.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it has engaged with the Equality and Human Rights Commission in relation to the 19 public bodies and organisations that were found to have misrepresented the Equality Act 2010.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
The EHRC has not published the details of or otherwise informed the Scottish Government of the 19 organisations that they have written to, following their review of evidence from the UK Government on single-sex space policies. This review process is a matter for the EHRC in fulfilling its statutory function role to monitor and enforce compliance with the Equality Act 2010.
Tess White.
Cabinet Secretary, the SNP Government has let public bodies break the law, betray women and burn public money, defending the indefensible, and it's absolutely shameful. The EHRC has reprimanded 19 organisations for misrepresenting the Equality Act 2010, yet the SNP Government is still peddling guidance which promotes self-ID to schools and prisons. Public bodies are completely at sea because the SNP put ideology before women's rights. Can the Minister tell us if she will be finding out if any of these organisations are based here in Scotland, and will she and the Government issue a directive to public bodies to follow the law by the end of the year at the latest?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I've already made clear to the Chamber on a number of occasions, the Scottish Government accepts the Supreme Court judgment and action is being undertaken. As well as accepting that judgment, we are moving forward with the detailed work that is necessary as a consequence. And I have again spoken in detail previously, Presiding Officer, on the working group that is considering that work right across government. We are not aware, out of the 19 bodies, how many are in Scotland. This is a matter for the EHRC. We've been clear, of course, to the public bodies in Scotland that we expect all bodies to follow lawful practice.
Question number 5, Sandesh Gulhani, who joins us remotely. I call question number 5, Sandesh Gulhani. I'll move on to question number 6 at the moment and call Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had recently with ScotRail regarding increasing the service frequency on the Largs to Glasgow Central route.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Officials at Transport Scotland are in a continued dialogue with ScotRail and Scottish Rail Holdings to ensure that the services provided by ScotRail meet passenger needs as much as possible. ScotRail has no immediate plans to increase the current service level between Largs and Glasgow Central as it continues to meet passenger demand and matches the frequency provided prior to the COVID pandemic. Thanks to the Scottish Government's investment, passengers travelling on the line benefit from the consistently high-performing electrified railway. In addition, commuters are now saving considerable amounts on their travel since this Government's initiative to remove peak fares for good.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. When the Largs line was electrified in 1987, the double track was reduced to a single one, restricting the number of trains able to run in each direction. Largs Station served 384,000 passengers last year, 25% more than the previous year, and numbers are virtually back to pre-COVID levels while national rail usage still lags behind. There is clearly an appetite for more train travel to Largs, but line infrastructure limits the current service to 1 an hour. Will the Cabinet Secretary press Network Rail and other partners to invest in the branch line to deliver the half-hourly service that better reflects growing demand?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, as I replied in my initial answer, the current service level for passengers in Largs is consistent with pre-COVID levels. It's meeting existing demand. Clearly, he makes the case for added investment and infrastructure investment. Obviously, he knows that we have to prioritise, and there is a considerable amount of infrastructure investment already taking place in our railways within immediate budgets. There are no immediate plans to double-track the track, and that's what would be required to deliver what the member is asking for. But he has made the case and he's brought it to my attention, so I'll ensure that my officials discuss that with Network Rail.
As we have been unable yet to make contact with Dr Gulhani, continue to question number 7. I call Katie Clark.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will make a direct award to the Ferguson Marine Shipyard for the replacement of the MV Lord of the Isles.
Cabinet Secretary.
Ministers consider all new vessel projects, including the MV Lord of the Isles, on a case-by-case basis to determine an appropriate and lawful route to market. Shipbuilding is a competitive global market. Any direct award of a public contract must comply with applicable procurement and subject control rules and be capable of withstanding legal challenge. Direct award of public contracts is only possible in strictly limited circumstances, and these matters take time to consider. We are currently considering the business case and the next steps in relation to the replacement of the MV Lord of the Isles, and will confirm these in due course.
Katie Clark.
Given these lifeline ferries are critical infrastructure, will the Scottish Government consider a direct award under Section 45 of the Subsidy Control Act? And I'm sure that the UK Government would be willing to work with them on this, given they've already made representations in relation to procurement law. Or, if the Scottish Government are going to go out to tender, will they look at what's happening in other parts of the UK, where the UK Government is placing a minimum of 10% social value element into the assessment of bids for shipbuilding contracts? That's not happening in Scotland. So will the Scottish Government look to include a social value weighting in any tendering processes?
Cabinet Secretary.
So we do have social value weighting in our current procurement legislation. I can confirm that we're actively looking at the options of both direct award and competitive procurement to determine an appropriate and lawful route for procurement. But I would refer, because I think it's important that we do reference what the islanders think themselves, and I'd like to quote, for a bit of balance in the media coverage, Don Daniel Peterana from the South Uist Business Impact Group, who in local media said, "We have every sympathy for the skilled workforce at Port Glasgow and for the need to sustain shipbuilding on the Clyde, but sympathy cannot come at the cost of island lives, livelihoods and long-term sustainability. To use our ferry needs as a tool for political point scoring would send out a deeply damaging message to our communities." But I think the tone in which the member has asked the question and the context she's done that would allow all the Chamber to consider this very important issue, but reflect all the needs of both the workforce and the islanders.
I regret that due to connectivity reasons I'm unable to call Standish Gilhani. I call Douglas Ross at question number 8.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the unified statement agreed at the Community Council Convention of the Highland Council area regarding the impact of major energy infrastructure in the region, will the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy give a response to this statement, and will she attend a future convention meeting to discuss it?
Minister Jim Fairley.
Presiding Officer, I should point out that I'm answering on behalf of the Cabinet Secretary. And will say that we are clear that the potential impacts of major infrastructure necessitates pre-application consultation and engagement with local communities. The Scottish Government has published good practice guidance on the procedures for applications under Sections 36 and 37 of the Electricity Act, which includes information on public consultations. While the power to mandate community benefits sits with the UK Government, we continue to press for mandatory provision from mature onshore technologies and a level playing field across the UK to ensure the energy transition delivers real benefits. Maintaining the standards of the Ministerial Code regarding live applications means Government ministers cannot attend public meetings of this nature.
Douglas Ross.
I'm sorry, that is not true, and it is not an answer to a very clear question. So can the Minister take this back to the Cabinet Secretary? There is no breach in the Ministerial Code for the Cabinet Secretary to meet and listen to concerns in the Highland Council area. That is all we are asking for, Minister. Can you pass that on to the Cabinet Secretary?
Minister.
I should point out to the member that, as a former minister, he will know that when we are looking at specific applications, there are clear guidelines within the Ministerial Code. However, I will take his point back to the Cabinet Secretary and she will respond in due course.
That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and I call Russell Finlay at question number 1.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Auditor-General today confirms that the SNP has a £1.2 billion black hole in social security spending. That's £1.2 billion for this year alone. And the SNP's benefit black hole is going to get even bigger, reaching £2 billion by 2030. The Auditor-General says this: the Scottish Government has not yet set out a detailed strategy for how it will manage the forecast gap between social security funding and spending within its overall budget. So this Government will spend £2 billion a year more on benefits than budgets provide, yet they have no plan to pay for it. So will John Swinney tell us what his plan is, or if he even has one?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, as Mr Finlay knows, the Scottish Government is obliged on an annual basis to balance our budget, and the Government has done that on every single occasion since we were elected to serve the people of Scotland in 2007. And the issue that Mr Finlay raises essentially comes down to: are we prepared to follow the benefit policies of the United Kingdom, which involve cuts to support to people with disabilities, some of the most vulnerable people in our society? And my government will do no such thing.
Russell Finlay.
Of course, social security is an essential safety net for every single citizen, but it has to be fair and it has to be affordable. The SNP have created an agency which takes claimants at face value when reviewing benefit claims. Claimants only have to tick a box in this form saying, my needs are the same, and that's it. The Auditor-General also says there is no system to investigate fraud, which is not only inevitable, but is happening right now. He says, and I'm quoting the Auditor-General here, there is no timescale for when Social Security Scotland can consider incorrect payments due to client error or fraud. So can John Swinney tell us when these vital checks will be introduced?
First Minister.
President Officer, one of the things that Mr Finlay omitted in his question was the fact that the Scottish Government, by the establishment of Social Security Scotland, has presided over the safe and effective transfer of personal independence payments to the adult disability payments for 350,000 disabled people in Scotland. Now, I want to take this opportunity to thank the staff of Social Security Scotland for doing such an excellent job in supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our society today. And if there are errors that are made in the system, or if there is evidence of fraud, these issues are already addressed by the systems that Social Security Scotland have in place. And those mechanisms are there to make sure that the public purse is protected, but also to make sure that support reaches those who need that support. And one of the undertones of Mr Finlay's question here, which he never gets round to answering, is whose benefits does he want to take away? Because we hear all of this rhetoric, but when it comes down to the hard, specific realities of whose benefits are getting withdrawn, Mr Finlay has got no answers.
Russell Finlay.
Well, it sounds to me like John Swinney saying the Auditor-General is wrong. And he's not. It's black and white. There are no systems in place to prevent fraud. And the Auditor-General also revealed today that 20% of PIP benefits are reduced or ended following standard review elsewhere in the UK. That's 20%. But for Scotland's equivalent benefit, it's just 3%. Again, and this is the words of the Auditor-General, this means, and I quote, Social Security Scotland does not have a reliable figure for the amount lost to fraud and error. Now, the SNP's approach isn't only naive and negligent, it is a betrayal of those in genuine need and of taxpayers. Can John Swinney tell us how much benefit fraud is taking place, or does he really have absolutely no idea?
First Minister.
President Officer, Mr Finlay omitted to say in his question that on the data around the United Kingdom system, a substantial proportion of those cases are then overturned on appeal. So the point that he advances to me is not a valid point to put to me. As I have indicated to Mr Finlay, the Scottish Government has put in place a system which is designed to meet the needs of some of the most vulnerable people in our society. I think that's the right purpose for a social security system, and that's the one this Government is proud to have in place in Scotland and delivering support to almost 350,000 of our most vulnerable citizens in Scotland today.
Russell Finlay.
Well, John Swinney every single week omits to give a straight answer to basic questions. There are no checks on fraud or error. There's not even a timeline for when checks might be introduced. Scotland's soaring benefits bill is unsustainable, but John Swinney has got no plan to pay for it. A £2 billion black hole made by the SNP. Now, this morning, the Cabinet Minister, Angela Constance, was asked 5 times how this bill would be paid. 5 times. And the best answer that she could come up with was, and I quote, "The money comes from the people of Scotland." And I think that will send a shudder down the spine of every single taxpayer in Scotland. So how much exactly will the SNP raise taxes to pay for their £2 billion benefit black hole?
First Minister.
Well, as Mr Finlay knows, all the issues around about tax are dealt with in the budget process, and there will be an opportunity for the Conservatives to engage in the budget process to discuss these issues. Now, I know that the Finance Secretary will engage in those discussions constructively, but the Conservatives have got to be able to come to those discussions with some proposals. It's not good enough to come here and say the soaring benefits bill and then...
Let's hear one another.
It's not good enough to come here and talk about the soaring benefits bill and then not say whose benefits are going to be taken away.
Let's hear one another.
And what the Conservatives, I'm certain, will want to do is exactly what their London equivalents did: pursue and harass vulnerable people in our society, and this government will not go down that road.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the news this week of the furlough scheme at the Alexander Dennis bus manufacturing site in Falkirk and Larbert. This is welcome respite for the workforce, and governments continue to work to secure a future for ADL in Larbert and Falkirk. Can I ask the First Minister, what guarantees has the government secured that if these contracts come, that Alexander Dennis will keep these sites open and maintain the jobs currently in Scotland? And as the government has now reopened ScotZeb 2 with public money, what guarantees can he give that this will lead to Scotland's buses being built in Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, first of all, I'm pleased that Mr Sarwar welcomes the progress that the Scottish Government has made in collaboration with Alexander Dennis and its workforce. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the company and to thank its workforce for engaging so substantively with the Deputy First Minister on all of these issues to get to a position where the Scottish Government has been able to support the company to retain hundreds of manufacturing jobs in Scotland, which is very, very welcome indeed. And the Government has engaged with the company. We've put in place the offer of a furlough scheme. The furlough scheme can only be activated if the company demonstrates success in securing the orders. There is growing confidence that those orders are secured that will be satisfactory. And in relation to ScotZeb 2, there is a procurement process that has to be pursued, and obviously the Government will report to Parliament on the conclusions of that exercise.
Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think the workforce will want to hear commitments on contracts in Scotland and also guarantees from the company in response to the very welcome furlough scheme. Industrial strategy must be more than simply crisis management, though. And so whether it's buses or ferries, we need a joined-up approach. On Monday, the GMB union led calls for the Ferguson's Marine Yard to receive a direct award for the next ferry for Scotland's fleet, a call that we welcome. John Swinney has spoken of his support for the yard, but when pressed on a direct award, his government will only say it's complicated. Guaranteeing a supply of work for that yard is essential to the workers there, but it's also essential to protect taxpayers' investment and for securing these jobs for generations to come. So can I ask John Swinney, in the spirit of collaboration, what legal advice has he sought on the direct award of contracts to Ferguson's, and will he share any existing advice with Parliament?
First Minister.
I think Mr Sarwar was in to hear the Transport Secretary give a detailed response to the question from Katie Clark on exactly the question about a potential direct award of the successor to the MV Lord of the Isles contract to Ferguson Marine. And what I said on Monday was, yes, it's complicated, but also that the Government is doing the detailed work to enable that to be considered. So I give Mr Sarwar the absolute assurance that the Government is strongly engaged in exploring that as a possibility, and the Transport Secretary gave comprehensive detail of the work that is underway. I think Mr Sarwar will understand that I cannot disclose the legal advice that's available to the Government on this question, because we need to consider all of those elements. But I give him the fundamental assurance that the Government is actively considering such a proposition, along with other propositions, as the Transport Secretary has just set out. But fundamentally, this contract and the whole question of continued support for Ferguson Marine, not just Ferguson Marine, but for, as part of a comprehensive industrial strategy for Scotland, which I think is essential. I think we're getting into territory now where we are seeing more progress being made on manufacturing opportunities within Scotland. I welcome that, and the Government's committed to making that happen. And our agencies, whether that's Scottish Enterprise or Transport Scotland or any other bodies, are actively engaged in that work.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, we need a more coherent industrial strategy where we build our vital infrastructure here in Scotland. That means buses built in Scotland so Scottish companies can thrive, and that means ferries built in Scotland so that Scottish shipyards can thrive. But under the SNP, we've had buses for Scotland built in China while Scotland's bus companies struggle, and ferries built in Turkey and Poland while Scotland's shipyards go without. I am clear that a Scottish Labour government I lead would build Scotland's buses, ferries and crucial infrastructure right here in Scotland. Will John Swinney make that same commitment and stop
Let's hear one another.
They don't want to hear it, Presiding Officer. Will John Swinney make that same commitment and stop sending public contracts to Poland, China and Turkey and give those jobs to Scotland?
First Minister.
I'm sorry to break some sombre news to Mr Sarwar, but when the Labour Party were the leading party in the Scottish Executive, the Labour Party sent contracts for ferries to Poland, and they sent contracts to other European countries as a consequence. So Mr Sarwar is going to have to check up on his history about the performance.
Let's hear one another.
He's going to have to check up on his history about the performance of the Labour government. And of course, what I would say is if people want to know what a Labour government might be like, they only need to look at the shambles that was in here before us and the shambles that's in place in the United Kingdom at the present moment. Now, I am all for buses being built in Scotland. I'm all for ferries being built in Scotland. I'm all for making sure we develop the skills to make sure we can do that. I'm all for making sure we make the investments to make that happen. That's what I was doing this week, to make sure that's likely to happen, and I'm proud of that record to the people of Scotland.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government's ferry fiasco is a national embarrassment. It has cost us a fortune, and yet no SNP minister has ever had the decency to resign. Scottish Liberal Democrats have been arguing for years that islanders and coastal communities deserve compensation for the colossal disruption to their lives. Now, the Scottish Government has belatedly set up a scheme, but far too many are excluded from it. So can I ask the First Minister, why do businesses on Mull, Iona, Col, Tiree, Isla and Jura all get absolutely nothing?
First Minister.
The Government has... well, first of all, I accept that there has been disruption to the ferry services in Scotland, and we are working hard to replace the fleet. And as Mr Cole-Hamilton will know, there are 6 large vessels. Well, one of the large vessels is now in service. Another is being finished at the Ferguson Marine Yard, and there are 4 further vessels coming from the Chemney Yard in Turkey. So that will give us 6 new vessels into the fleet in the period, in the current period, and those contracts are taking their course. So that will strengthen the ferry network. Now, in relation to the compensation scheme, the Government's put in place a compensation scheme that examines the degree of disruption in different island communities and considers where that disruption has been of an acute nature and where it merits the delivery of payments. So if in the islands that Mr Cole-Hamilton has cited, the level of disruption has not been of a level that is comparable to the areas of more significant disruption. And that is the judgment that's been applied by ministers in putting in place a compensation scheme. And we, of course, discuss and consider those schemes with the relevant island communities.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
The First Minister should try and tell that to those communities who've literally seen their timetables altered to hide the cancellations. Unfair, arbitrary, divisive. That's what Joe Reid from the Island Bakery on Mull says about the scheme. That's what everyone in excluded communities thinks. The Scottish Liberal Democrat consultation on the future of ferries closes tomorrow. We're listening to everyone affected. The Scottish Government clearly isn't, because there's no compensation for Mull, where the toy shops of Tobermory are genuinely displaying signs that say their toy ferries are more reliable than real-life counterparts. No compensation for Cumbrae or Ardrossan, which has lost its link to Arran because the SNP government built a boat that doesn't fit their harbour. No compensation for the islands and port towns of the West Highlands or in Argyll and Bute, where timetables were stripped back to hide those cancellations. Sympathy doesn't pay the bills. When will the First Minister enrol them in the scheme? When will they get this cash?
First Minister.
Well, President Officer, let me just take the example that Mr Cole-Hamilton puts to me about the ferry service to Arran. Now, what the Government has put in place a 2-vessel service that crosses from Troon to Brodick. I accept the disruption to Ardrossan. That's why Mr Gibson has been given the solemn commitment of the Government for the acquisition of Ardrossan Harbour so that we can take that into public ownership and make sure it can have the enhancements that are required to be undertaken. So that particular example I give demonstrates there has been a two-vessel service between the mainland and Arran on a constant basis, and there are, of course, other ferry links from the mainland to Arran at Loch Ranza. So there are a variety of other opportunities that are available, and where the service, unfortunately, has not been satisfactory, we have put compensation in place. And that's come about by examining and exploring the disruption that's taken place and providing the support that our islanders deserve.
Question number 4, Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the potential impact on households in Scotland of the forecast from the Food and Drink Federation that food and drink inflation could reach 5.7% by December.
First Minister.
President Officer, I agree with Mr MacDonald and with the comments on the Food and Drink Federation, whose forecast is very concerning, particularly for low-income households in Scotland who are already grappling with cost-of-living pressures and are disproportionately affected by rising food prices. If I could quote the Chief Economist of KPMG, who summarised the situation as follows, and I quote, "Since April, the rise in inflation has been driven largely by domestic policy choices, including the increase in employers' national insurance contributions." Now, the Scottish Government is taking steps to try to support households, our most recent intervention being the abolition of peak rail fares, but we have other interventions such as the Scottish Child Payment. But what doesn't help us is when we have significant negative economic impacts coming from policy choices such as the UK Government's decision to increase employers' national insurance contributions, which is damaging the economy.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. According to the Food and Drink Federation, this inflation increase is down to Labour policies, such as a rise in national insurance contributions and skyrocketing energy prices, meaning once again families and businesses in Scotland are paying the price of Westminster policies. Can the First Minister outline what the Scottish Government is doing to provide support to families in Edinburgh, Pentlands and across Scotland who are struggling with the ever-increasing cost of living?
Minister.
Well, the Government is taking steps to, through our budget provisions to allocate over £3 billion to policies which tackle poverty and the cost of living. Some of those measures include the Scottish Child Payment, the availability of free prescriptions, the support of bus travel for 2.3 million people, and more than £6,000 per eligible individual in early learning and childcare support. So the Government is taking forward steps to our own resources to support families facing difficulties. We will constantly look to establish how best that can be undertaken, but we have to do that against the backdrop of decisions taken by the United Kingdom Government which create ever more challenge for families and ever more challenge for the Scottish Government to address those circumstances for families in our country.
Question number 5, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government will support town and city centres as retail destinations.
First Minister.
Economic growth is at the very heart of the Government's agenda. We're working closely with businesses to drive economic growth in our towns and cities and support both consumers and local businesses. This includes funding the Scotland Loves Local campaign, funding of over £3 million to address the issue of retail crime in Scotland, and the most generous business rates relief in the United Kingdom. Our competitive non-domestic rates regime in 25-26 includes a freeze on the basic property rate, delivering the lowest such rate in the United Kingdom for the 7th year running, and maintaining the lowest property tax rate in the UK for over 95% of non-domestic properties in Scotland. And these are some of the measures we're taking to support towns and city centres.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. All colleagues in this chamber will be aware of the decline of town and city centres as traditional retail destinations. This week, the Scottish Retail Consortium published a 5-point plan to make it more attractive for retailers to invest, including changes in planning, a focus on retail crime and, crucially, in their words, a more competitive business rate than England. Because despite what the First Minister has just said, in the last 3 years, this Scottish Government has not passed on to businesses here the much more generous rates relief available south of the border. So will it now rethink its position and give retailers here the support they need.
First Minister.
I welcome the contribution of the Scottish Retail Consortium to the debate, and obviously we will consider these proposals further. The Finance Secretary met with the Scottish Retail Consortium this week, and we will give every consideration to their ideas. There are a number of steps that the Government has taken to support the position of town centres, and as I indicated in my earlier answer to Mr Fraser, that we maintain the lowest property tax rate in the UK for over 95% of non-domestic properties in Scotland. So the Government has got a long track record of making sure that businesses in our town centres are able to be supported with a competitive business tax regime, and we will look to reflect that in the policy and budget proposals that the Government brings forward.
Ben Macpherson.
It is well understood that hospitality businesses bring people to town and city centres, which benefits all, including retail, like what happens at the superb Shore area in my constituency and on Leith Walk and elsewhere too. But I know that too many of our hospitality businesses are struggling at the moment, largely because of the employers' national insurance increases earlier this year and other factors as well. Therefore, does the First Minister agree with me and UK Hospitality that the UK Chancellor needs to consider a VAT cut for hospitality in the UK Government's upcoming budget?
First Minister.
Such a measure would certainly help the hospitality sector, and it would go some way to deal with the negative consequences that have been created by the increase in employers' national insurance contributions. And that, for a United Kingdom government that is supposedly interested in growth, to apply an increase in employers' national insurance contributions is beyond my conception as to why that's a good idea, because it stifles growth, and we're seeing the effects of that in many communities around the country. Now, Mr Macpherson sets out the arguments that will need to be considered by the UK Government in the budget. We will, of course, be engaging in making representations to the UK Government on that question. And the steps that we're taking within Scotland to support many businesses within our town and retail centres will continue to consider any changes in regulation and in the planning system that we can apply that will make it easier for businesses to trade and to be able to create the type of economic opportunities that we want to see in our town and retail communities.
Claire Baker.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome the commitment to millions of pounds for Kirkcaldy Town Centre that's come from the UK Labour Government? This investment has the potential to kick-start the town centre regeneration of the Langtoon. Can I ask the First Minister how he will work with the UK Government and the community to maximise the benefits?
First Minister.
Well, I welcome the investment that's been made in Kirkcaldy Town Centre and by the UK Government. I welcome any contribution, but I think what we've got to see is the whole picture, because Kirkcaldy Town Centre's difficulties will have been exacerbated by the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, which is making it more expensive to employ people in our economy. So I'm all for giving a warm welcome to the benevolence of the United Kingdom Government, but I'll also point out their shortcomings, and there are plenty of those.
Question number 6, Maggie Chapman.
Ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to protect renters in the private sector from homelessness.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Scotland leads the United Kingdom in supporting private tenants, backed by some of the strongest homelessness legislation in the country. We've also recently announced an ambitious plan backed with £4.9 billion to accelerate action on tackling the housing emergency. The Housing Scotland Bill, now at stage 3, will further strengthen support by introducing new prevention duties, enhanced protections for domestic abuse victims and new tenants' rights, including the introduction of rent controls. This year, we are also providing over £99 million to local authorities for discretionary housing payments, mitigating the cruel bedroom tax from Westminster. But there are limitations on how much this government can do. One of the most significant levers of support is local housing allowance, and this government has repeatedly called on the UK Government to commit to uprating housing support for tenants, and I hope that will be delivered in the upcoming budget on the 26th of November.
Maggie Chapman.
A renter moving into their new home today will have no clear sense of how long they can stay before they could be kicked out by their landlord. They may have as little as 4 weeks and a maximum of 3 months' notice. Sarah, James and their 2 children were evicted from their home in Inverness. They were unable to find a suitable home in their 3 months' notice. A family of 4 forced into a cramped 1-bedroom flat. It was so much smaller than what they needed. Renters in England will soon be protected from eviction on the most common grounds for the first 12 months of their tenancy and get a longer notice period. But that right does not currently exist in Scotland. With the housing bill next week, we can fix this. So, will the First Minister commit to supporting Green amendments that ensure Scotland does not fall behind and improve protections from eviction for renters in Scotland?
First Minister.
I appreciate the significance of the points that Maggie Chapman puts to me, and I want to make sure that families are able to rely upon good quality accommodation. That's why the Government is investing so significantly in housing. It's why we're making progress on the acquisitions work and on the voids work, where we're bringing more and more properties back into use as a consequence of the increased investment that the Government is putting in place. We already have very significant protections in place in existing legislation, and as Maggie Chapman indicates, there will be consideration given to the housing bill at its final stages in the relatively near future. So the Government will look at all policy proposals, but I would encourage Maggie Chapman to consider the significant steps that have already been taken to provide greater protection for renters within Scotland, and that provides substantial protection for individuals and tenants in Scotland.
Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The truth is that the SNP has had 18 years to get a grip of Scotland's worsening housing shortage. Figures released this week show that the number of families in temporary accommodation have increased by 6%. 10,000 children remain trapped in temporary accommodation.
Let's hear Ms Gallagher.
Is on the rise. They don't want to hear it, Presiding Officer, but the figures speak for themselves. So my question to the First Minister is this. Can he tell Parliament when the housing emergency will end? And is he confident that his government can achieve their target of 15,000 affordable homes, especially when we're debating a housing bill next week that will not result in one single home being built?
Absolutely. First Minister.
Well, what builds homes is the combination of private investment, where the Government has made changes to the housing bill to enable that to be sustainable, and secondly, public expenditure. And the public expenditure that's now in place for the Government's budget in 2025-26 is £808 million, which is £251 million more than it was last year. Now, Megan Gallagher was one of the Conservative members who did not vote for that provision, just like the Labour Party didn't vote for that provision. So what we've got here is another example of members of Parliament coming forward, not prepared to vote for the provisions that will actually solve the problems that they are raising with me at First Minister's question time. That is not a way to solve the housing crisis. The way to solve the housing crisis is for the Government's programme...
Let's hear one another.
The way to solve the housing crisis in Scotland is to build on the strong record of this Government, which has built...
Members, we have many members wishing to put questions. Let's hear one another.
Let me explain the point that I'm making. Between 1999 and 2007, there was an average of 5,448 affordable homes built under the Labour and Liberal government. Under this government, it's an average of 7,734 each year. So the SNP government has built more houses on average per year than our predecessors. That's because we're prepared to take the action to deliver on the housing emergency when everyone just postures in the Labour and Conservative parties.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, Scotland's gaming industry continues to go from strength to strength. This week, Scotland hosted the prestigious DICE Europe Summit for the first time in Edinburgh, which saw industry global leaders come to Edinburgh for key talks. Can the First Minister advise what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the sector to Scotland's economy, and advise what steps he is taking in his government to ensure the skills and support to ensure that we continue to be a hub for the games industry in Scotland?
First Minister.
President Officer, I very much welcome the points that have been raised by Claire Adamson, and it was my pleasure, along with the Innovation Minister Richard Lockhead, to host representatives of the games industry at Bute House on Monday evening as part of the prestigious DICE Europe Summit. And we brought together, the summit came to Scotland for the first time. This is an industry that matters, and we brought their senior leaders to Bute House to consider how we can continue to build on the growth that has already been delivered. We now have an industry in Scotland that has increased in turnover by nearly 800% since 2010. It's a huge vote of confidence in the industry, and the Government is investing in our skills system to make sure that our universities are able to produce the graduates that will support the industry. We provide targeted enterprise support for our start-up ecosystem, and we have a whole range of other programmes to support our creative industries, which again this week delivered formidable achievements in terms of the steps that have been taken to engage young people and members of the public. And I very much welcome the participation of the DICE Summit in Scotland, and I look forward to supporting the industry as part of the Government's focus on growth.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since last November, I have been assisting a couple and their baby daughter to obtain support from Warmworks to replace their broken heating system with a zero-carbon alternative. That process began over a year ago, and in that time they've had no permanent heating or hot water in their home, where both their young child and their mother have chronic health conditions. Warmworks has offered conflicting advice, they have lost reports, and despite the helpful intervention from Cabinet Secretary Manny McCallan when she instructed Warmworks to re-engage with my office, they have failed to respond to both my constituents and I in the timescales directed by the Cabinet Secretary. Will the First Minister and his Cabinet Secretary please look into my constituents' situation as a matter of urgency before they spend another winter without heating and hot water?
First Minister.
If Mr Whittle would furnish me with the details of this case, it will obviously be familiar to Government if the Cabinet Secretary has already intervened. I have to say, what Mr Whittle has recounted to me, I'm not very happy with, because if a Cabinet Secretary directs an organisation to engage with a Member of Parliament, I would expect that Member of Parliament to be engaged with substantially, regardless of their politics in this chamber. So if Mr Whittle would let me know about that. I've dealt with on a constituency basis with Warmworks on a number of occasions, so I've pursued cases where things have not worked out perfectly. So if Mr Whittle would give me the details, I will pursue that on his behalf.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what urgent action the Scottish Government is taking to ensure adequate fire service provision in Edinburgh in light of the reported proposal to close Marionville Fire Station, the area expanding population as well as the increased activity at Lit Docks.
First Minister.
There is a consultation process underway led by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, which looks fundamentally at the basis of delivering a safe and sustainable fire service that's appropriate for our needs at this particular time. Now, I know that there is widespread concern about the Marionville fire station. I've seen representations about that. I would encourage all interested parties to engage with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and I give Mr Chowdhury the assurance that the Fire and Rescue Service will be undertaking this consultation on the basis of assessing the needs for a sustainable and safe delivery of a service, and that must include for his constituents in the City of Edinburgh.
Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the First Minister's unwavering commitment to protecting and enhancing our Scotch whisky industry, a vital, thriving sector which creates thousands of jobs across Scotland. Can the First Minister provide further details on his recent meeting with President Trump in Washington ahead of the UK-US trade talks, where he made the case to reduce the tariffs on the Scotch whisky industry, something the US industry supports?
First Minister.
President Officer, as colleagues will be aware, I travelled to Washington DC last week to support the efforts of the Scotch Whisky Association and their counterparts in the United States in the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States and the Kentucky Distillers Association, who have a shared and symbiotic relationship in relation to the sustainability of the industry. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to spend about 50 minutes with President Trump explaining this argument, and I had substantial engagement with President Trump on that issue. I need to be clear to Parliament that I was making representations on behalf of the industry. I was not negotiating a trade deal. That is the proper responsibility of the United Kingdom Government. But I did also have the opportunity last night at the state event hosted by His Majesty the King at Windsor Castle to further discuss this issue with President Trump, and I will continue to engage to ensure that I deliver the type of zero-for-zero arrangement that the United States whisky industry and the Scotch whisky industry are seeking, because I think that makes economic sense on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah. Douglas Lumsden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the coming days, SSEM will submit their planning applications to have mega pylons span from the Highlands right through the North East to the Central Belt. Community groups in rural areas feel ignored. Now, Gillian Martin is happy to jet off to Japan next week to sell off Scotland's countryside to foreign wind developers, but still refuses to meet these community groups. So will the First Minister do something that his Energy Minister is too feared to do, and meet these groups who are seeing their countryside trashed by energy infrastructure?
First Minister.
As a matter of fact, the Climate Secretary is in Japan this week, and she's at the Osaka Expo, at which she is promoting the tremendous strengths in Scotland in renewable energy. And I think it's exactly the type of work that ministers should be doing in promoting the interests of Scotland to an international audience. And I welcome all that the Energy Secretary is doing. Now, of course, Mr Lumsden invites me to consider issues that will become the subject of live planning consideration by ministers, and he knows the rules as well as I do that I can't engage myself in issues that will be determined by ministers which are of this nature, and the proper process will be taken forward.
Duncan Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer members to my register of interest. Presiding Officer, care workers, 80% of whom are women, and many who are among our lowest paid workers, make independent living possible. Indeed, I wouldn't be in this chamber without them. Yet, Enable Scotland staff in Glasgow have been forced to strike because of recurring empty promises to deliver sectoral bargaining and fair pay, leaving carers across the sector rightfully angry and third sector organisations really struggling. I stand in solidarity today with those staff and their trade union Unison, who have said that despite promises, the government have delivered, and I quote from care workers in Glasgow, year-on-year disappointments. So can I ask the First Minister, when will he and his government stop disappointing? Will he acknowledge that care has been undervalued by the government? And will he get round the table with them as soon as possible on sectoral bargaining and pay parity, starting with at least £15 per hour?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, first of all, let me say that I totally acknowledge the points that Pam Duncan-Glancy makes about the importance of care workers in supporting independent living, and I express my admiration to those workers in general, but especially to the fine individuals that support Ms Duncan-Glancy, who are always a joy to see in Parliament. Can I say that this is a pay dispute between Unison and Enable, so Pam Duncan-Glancy will understand that I have to leave that to trade unions and employers to resolve these issues. The Government, for its part, is investing approximately £900 million in social care pay support. I value the work that care workers undertake. The state relies entirely on those care workers to provide that support. Obviously, we continue to look to see what more we can do in this respect. That will be a material part of the budget process, and as I said in one of my earlier answers, the Finance Secretary will be engaging with all parties on those priorities in the run-up to the setting of the Government's budget for the next financial year.
Colin Beattie.
The UK Government's harmful decision to continue the Tory freeze on local housing allowance rates will impact thousands of low-income renters in Scotland, widening the gap between housing support for private renters and private sector rents. Will the First Minister therefore join me in calling on the Labour UK government to permanently repeg LHA rates to at least the 30th percentile of local rents, a vital move which the Resolution Foundation states would lift 75,000 children out of poverty by the end of the UK Parliament?
Thank you. Just a reminder to all members that questions should be put referencing the First Minister's responsibilities in a clear manner. First Minister.
Well, President, this issue is one that the Government recognises. One of my earlier answers I made reference to the point about local housing allowance, because that uplift would assist us in tackling the issues of homelessness that we're wrestling with, and also in supporting families that are living with poverty. In this financial year, the Government's making £7.9 million available to mitigate against shortfalls in local housing allowance rates to help to protect tenancies. And we are also making a further £2 million available to support households in temporary accommodation to find settled homes. But there will, of course, be much greater assistance if there was to be a link established with local housing allowance, and I encourage the UK Labour Government to do exactly that.
Jackson Carlaw.
Further to the question of Evelyn Tweed, may I congratulate the First Minister on his attendance at Windsor Castle yesterday at the state banquet for President Trump and the First Lady of the United States. The whole Chamber will rejoice at the warm, personal, emerging relationship that is developing between the First Minister and the President. Fair gladdens all our hearts. In fact, I feel the hearts of the Scottish Greens melting even as I speak. What wasn't immediately clear from the answer he gave to Evelyn Tweed, which I think the Chamber would wish to know, is what impression he got from President Trump of the representations he made on behalf of the Scottish whisky industry, and whether he hopes or has any expectation that they may lead to good news for our industry in the near future.
First Minister.
One thing that I will always be able to say about Jackson Carlaw is he knows how to bring hilarity into the parliamentary chamber. And Jackie Bailey thinks I can manage it too. I'm glad I'm conveying such bonhomie today. It's not always how Jackie Bailey describes my contribution to Parliament, but if bonhomie is the order of the day, then I shall settle for that. On the question, I think the fact that President Trump was prepared to engage in discussions about this issue in the Oval Office should be welcomed, because it indicates a willingness to consider the propositions that I'm putting forward. And fundamentally, that's all I can ask for, is to get a fair hearing about issues that are affecting the industry in Scotland. I was able to marshal to President Trump some of the difficulties that are being created for the industry in Scotland as a consequence of tariffs. But some of those difficulties are also being prevalent in the United States, because the tariffs are leading to a loss of employment in Kentucky because of the reduction in production activity in the Scotch whisky industry. So I hope out of that, what I've characterised as a win-win situation, President Trump will be persuaded by my arguments, but time will tell on that matter.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
Presiding Officer, you know what I'm going to mention, because I emailed you this morning seeking to raise this at First Minister's questions. First Minister, as I left the chamber yesterday, I was physically assaulted and verbally abused by your Minister for Parliamentary Business, Jamie Hepburn.
Through the Chair, please, Mr Ross.
This was the point I would make to the First Minister. I'm wondering if the First Minister will make a statement and take an opportunity to say that he has a zero-tolerance approach to threatening and intimidating behaviour by his ministers. I have raised this yesterday afternoon with parliamentary officials. I notice the Minister for Parliamentary Business is not in the chamber this afternoon. Therefore, will he be making a statement on this incident later today?
Thank you. Obviously, comments addressed to the First Minister in the chamber are not a point of order, but I would say that this is a very serious allegation, and it is important that it's dealt with through the appropriate processes. I expect all members to take their responsibilities under the Code of Conduct seriously, and where anyone considers that the conduct of a member hasn't met the terms of the Code, a complaint can be made, and complaints in relation to most matters covered by the Code including a complaint of this nature, would be initially investigated by the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland. And recommendations coming from any complaints may, of course, come to this chamber in due course. Therefore, I must avoid any comment that might compromise that. But complaints about the conduct of a member arising in their ministerial duties are dealt with under the Scottish Ministerial Code and are a matter for the First Minister. Thank you. We will allow a few moments for the chamber and the public gallery to clear before we move on to the next item of business, which is a members' business debate in the name of Emma Roddick.
Okay, if I could ask members leaving the chamber and those leaving the public gallery to do so as quickly and as quietly as possible as we resume business. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 18710 in the name of Emma Roddick on increasing frequency and intensity of wildfires. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Emma Roddick to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to first recognise that there is a crowd of people outside the Parliament as I speak from Climate Mass Lobby. I know that I have a number of constituents who have made the journey from the Highlands and Islands in order to have their voice heard, and while I'm in here leading what I know is a very important debate, I do want to recognise what they are doing as well and apologise that I can't be with them today. Increasing intensity and frequency of wildfires is expected given the climate change and related extreme weather events that we're seeing. I'm clear that effort is needed to tackle climate change if we want this world to remain habitable for our own species and to mitigate the impact of wildfires, flooding and other events on our infrastructure, our communities and our natural environment. The less that we do to limit our own impact on climate change, the more it is going to cost us in lives, livelihoods and financially. These are expensive events to tackle and to recover from. Overall efforts to decarbonise transport, housing, energy is not separate to what I'm about to speak to, nor is restoring biodiversity. But I will focus for the rest of my speech on the reality that regardless of what I hope becomes an escalation in efforts worldwide to address our impact on the climate, we need to get better at preventing and reacting to wildfires. I've had many constituents write to me about this. Some have been heavily and personally impacted by wildfires, and others are simply devastated at what they've witnessed, particularly at Davamere this summer. Fires destroyed woodland, killed thousands of animals, and reportedly could be smelled as far away from the site as Orkney. One common theme in what folk have been calling for is action against the irresponsible tourism and camping that is so often linked to these events. Even when the exact cause is not known, like at Dava, remains of glass bottles, burnt tinfoil and campsites spotted amongst the devastation infuriate locals, especially victims of the blaze. The Cairngorms National Park Authority is leading the way, with Scotland's first fire management bylaw currently waiting for sign-off from ministers, restricting open fires and barbecues. I'm glad that these steps have been taken to protect our national park, but this action is something that I and many others in the Highlands would like to see replicated across the region. The Minister has heard from me on numerous occasions about the potential for a Scotland-wide ban on disposable barbecues, particularly over the summer months, and I hope that he can lay out when he sums up any limitations on the government in doing this and what his suggested way forward is. Because it's not enough to say that the issue is complex and leave it alone. We need to take action here. If we're unsure about devolved competence, we must test that, not just abdicate responsibility. The temporary fun of a disposable barbecue is not worth the danger to life, whether humans or animals, wild or livestock, the risk to the environment or the potential damage to rural businesses and homes. As the CAO of the CMPA, Grant Moyer, told me, the recreational fires that were agreed as appropriate 25 years ago are no longer so. The risk of wildfire has increased, the intensity of them when they do catch is greater, and the incidence of uncontrolled fires, thanks to folk taking risks, is simply too high. The CNPA is doing a lot that could be replicated elsewhere and leading the way. We don't need to reinvent any wheels. Under its Climate Adaptation Fund, it has so far provided grants of over £600,000, including for fire management equipment and training for estates and contractors. With SLE, it's working to replace equipment that was damaged in the Dava fires. This building of resilience and use of existing expertise and roles based on the ground where the wildfires will take place will undoubtedly support faster and more effective reaction when fires are spotted. Another frequent issue raised with me is that of helicopters and who should have easy access to one. Amongst the various suggestions made are that Nature Scot is not quick enough to react, as landowner insurance can cause issues. Given the risks in allowing fires to spread, looking at how the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service can more quickly and reliably get access to helicopter support in tackling blazes seems overdue. Scottish Land and Estates has suggested that the fire service should have its own helicopter capabilities. A constituent of mine suggested this should sit with Nature Scot, and another in discussion told me it really doesn't matter. Whoever can react should be given the resources to do so now. Management of fuel load, of course, comes up frequently too, and I hope that the Minister will respond to demands from gamekeepers on ensuring that muir-burn licences are attainable to help with wildfire prevention. Mutual aid provided by land managers in a crisis is invaluable. These are people who know the land, know the access, know the risk factors involved. As the Government responds to cross-party calls today for more action on this, they will need to include those voices in plans and policies. I'm not one for calling for action plans, strategies or other government synonyms, but the lack of a Scottish wildfire plan does seem to be a screaming gap, given the massive coordination between authorities that is needed to manage both the risk and active incidents. The kit available to fire services to tackle wildfires must be considered in the context of working with other people on the ground. Both parties should be part of those needed discussions on what further SFRS equipment could be helpful and complementary to local efforts. I've already shared the suggestion of one constituent with Government that we need more data and strong evidence about the land use and vegetation that was on the ground at the time that a wildfire caught and spread. Knowing more about this reality rather than different sectors pointing fingers at each other would be invaluable. Now, even my generous 7 minutes today isn't long enough to cover all the points raised by stakeholders reacting to today's debate, but I do look forward to hearing everyone else's contributions. This is one of the largest volumes of correspondence that I've had about a member's business debate. Now, my excellent motion drafting skills might have played a part in that, but I suspect the bigger reason is the genuine and deep-rooted willingness from people on the ground, gamekeepers, NGOs, the public, organisations and lobby groups to play their part in wildlife prevention and tackling incidents. The Scottish Government has access to a wealth of knowledge, experience and volunteer willingness out there to grab hold of to tackle the increasing intensity and frequency of wildfires. And I hope that that is sincerely and enthusiastically made use of, and that the cross-party consensus I hope we're about to hear results in real concentrated action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Roddick. Just to advise the Chamber, there is an awful lot of interest in speaking. I am keen to ensure that everybody that has requested to speak has an opportunity to do so, and for the 4 minutes, but they will need to stick to the 4 minutes, even with the motion without notice to extend the time, which I confidently predict will be necessary. With that, I call first Finlay Carson, to be followed by Emma Harper. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's refreshing to have a debate on a burning issue that truly matters to communities communities across Scotland, rather than the recent focus on foreign policy and constitutional wrangling. But puns apart, this is a very serious issue. The increasing frequency and intensity of wildfires in Scotland, and including in my own constituency of Galloway and Western Fleece, is deeply alarming. These fires are no longer rare events. They are becoming a growing threat to people, property and our natural environment. And I thank Emma Roddick for bringing this important debate to the Chamber. It's an issue that demands urgent action from the SNP government, not another case of it being kicked into the long grass. Traditionally in Dumfries and Galloway, the peak fire season runs from early March for around 12 weeks. Yet this year we saw 10 fire alerts between the 13th of January and the 15th of September, an unusually high figure compared to the previous years going back to 2012. An FOI request revealed that Scotland has suffered 1,574 wildfires in the last decade. Alarmingly, this figure has already seen more wildfires than any other full year except 2017 and 18. These figures, drawn from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service data, coincide with periods of historically high temperatures, something confirmed by weather forecasters' records. Over the same period, Scotland has increased tree cover, reduced grazing by sheep and deer, and seen fewer hectares of upland under active management through prescribed burning. These changes, while some believe are well-intentioned, have undeniably contributed to the problem. The threat is not only to human life but also to wildlife in our countryside, where the loss of tree cover has been dramatic. Sorry, I don't have time. In early April, a major wildfire in Galloway forced people and properties to be evacuated. Emergency services, supported by helicopters, battled a blaze that stretched several miles wide at its peak. However, amid the crisis, the response from volunteers and local organisations was nothing short of extraordinary. The Galloway Mountain Rescue Team worked tirelessly around the clock, evacuating campers from danger zones, often in the dead of night. Using advanced tools such as drones for thermal imaging, they provided critical intelligence to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and even coordinated the Rescue 199 from Prestwick to airlift people to safety. Their efforts undoubtedly saved lives and prevented tragedy. We must also commend the Glentrool Hive community volunteers who provided food, shelter and welfare support to exhausted responders during the height of the emergency. Their support and resilience was a lifeline for those on the front lines. Local farmers and land-based businesses also stepped up, supplying water bowsers, ATVs and manpower to help contain the fire. This collaboration between emergency services, rural business and volunteers demonstrates the very best of community spirit in the face of adversity. While public behaviour is a factor, the SNP government cannot ignore its responsibility to ensure our communities are better prepared. That means listening to those with first-hand experience, and that's the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, rather than ignoring their warnings. Earlier this year, I called on the First Minister to listen and take action. Instead, he ignored my calls and blamed those for not supporting his budget. That was far from an acceptable response. But regrettably, the First Minister seems determined to press ahead with savage cuts that will close fire stations in many rural areas and cost jobs. This will inevitably increase response times and put lives at risk. The Fire Brigade Union has been clear there must be no further cuts. Deputy Presiding Officer, if the SNP government is serious about protecting the public from wildfires and other emergencies, it must act now. That means proper funding of our fire service, listening to the expert advice and support from voluntary and rural sectors. Finally, I once again want to put on record my heartfelt thanks to the Galloway Mountain Rescue Team and the Glentrool Hive volunteers and the many local farmers and businesses who gave of their time to protect lives and livestock.
Thank you, Mr Carson. I now call Emma Harper to be followed by Rhoda Grant. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Emma Roddick for bringing this debate to Parliament today? I know her region was hit hard with the biggest wildfire this summer around Dava, causing massive devastation in an area of great beauty and natural resource. Parts of my South Scotland region were sadly hit hard also. April saw one of the biggest wildfires in living memory in Galloway. 17,000 acres of moor and forest were destroyed around Glentrool in a fire lasting several days, and the after effects of which are still being seen in the community and will be seen for many years to come. That is nearly the entire surface area of Loch Lomond, that's 17,000 acres, ablaze and alight and now almost bereft of life. Thankfully, like other wildfires in Scotland, there was no fatalities or serious injuries, at least among human beings, but I am also concerned about the wildlife. It may only be a matter of time before someone is seriously injured or killed in a wildfire. At Glentrool, hikers were evacuated from hills by emergency services and campers were told to locate to a place of safety. I fear that at some point in the future we will be reading reports of the death of someone who couldn't be reached in time and suffered a terrible fate. We must do all we can to prevent that becoming reality. We saw just how hard our emergency and response services worked. I want to again place on record my thanks to the Fire and Rescue Service, the police and the Galloway Mountain Rescue Team for their supreme dedication, their work and bravery in helping tackle the Glentrool fire, and of course the local people at the Glentrool Hive, as Finlay Carson has mentioned as well. They have worked incredibly hard under stressful and difficult threatening situations, supporting emergency responders, thrown open the doors to the Hive and in the middle of the night, and making sure that those tackling the fire could get some rest, refuel and necessary internet access. Some years ago, we saw issues with sky lanterns being launched and landing miles away, risking wildfire and damage to property and livestock. Thankfully, the use of these things seems to have died down, but in many ways it's more disheartening that the wildfires we now see are almost certainly caused in situ, where those responsible, even if by accident, can see for themselves the landscape and the environment that their actions can destroy. I am proud we have some of the best and open access legislation in the world. In contrast to the hugely restrictive regime across the border, for example, we have a framework that allows people to enjoy our land freely and without unnecessary restrictions. But we also have to face the fact that a small minority of people exercising those rights are doing so irresponsibly and putting locals, their livelihoods and their environment at huge risk. We can't say for certain what caused the Galloway wildfires. Finding a needle in a haystack is impossibly tricky when that haystack is 17,000 acres. But our fire and rescue service are clear. Most of them are started by human activity. To me, that means educating anyone accessing our world-class countryside of the devastating, irresponsible use of those access rights that can have on our communities. Climate change is here, and as we have to adjust our way of living and around working to that reality. And as Ms Roddick mentioned, there is a climate change mass rally at Dynamic Earth right now, which I was hoping to be at today as well. One action to take has a higher priority across public policy, and I hope Emma Roddick's debate and the contributions from around the Chamber today are playing a part in informing the Government's thinking on how to, as far as possible, prevent these disasters from happening again.
Thank you, Ms Harper. I now call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Fergus Ewing. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Grant.
For years, the Fire Brigade Union has been raising the alarm. The Scottish Government has been warned that there has to be proper plans in place to deal with wildfires and the necessary resources to support them. The increase in wildfires is due to climate change and changes in heather moor management, and we need urgent climate action if we're to properly protect life and property from wildfires. And the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service needs significant investment. This means more firefighters, better equipped and trained, along with better planning, research and coordination. The head of the service, instead of fighting for proper investment for the service that they have presided over, and in some cases recommended unprecedented cuts to frontline resources. Understaffing has been so bad that throughout the last period of wildfires, nearly all fire and rescue services have been most severely affected. In areas, the call-up of off-duty firefighters where they've been asked to work extra shifts. The fire engines have sat in stations because there's not enough people to crew them in such circumstances. Fire Brigade Union members have worked to exhaustion. I've lodged a series of parliamentary questions seeking information on the current state of the service in the Highlands and Islands constituency, and I was